Mayor, Mayor, you can start in 3, 2, 1.
All right, we'll call to order the City Council workshop agenda for Monday, April the 8th, 2024 at 4:30 PM. With that, we'll move to roll call and certification of quorum. Madam Secretary, I'll certify we have a quorum present, as all members are present with the exception of members Carbone and Tooman. So, in fact, Mr. Tooman will be absent the remainder of the evening. We should see Mr. Carbone for the 6:30 meeting. With that, do we have any citizens' comments? Having none signed up to speak, then we'll move to new business. Council discussion regarding proposed changes to Parks and Recreation's athletic field use policies and rental fees. With that, Trent, we'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Council. I'm going to be very brief in that we have had some preliminary discussions on these things, that we want to revamp these moving forward. So we've gone through some work to get to this point, and Carrie's going to carry the bulk of the presentation tonight, but right now I'm going to hand it over to Assistant City Manager Victor Brownlees to get things kicked off. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Trent. Mayor and Council, happy to introduce the workshop this evening. As Trent says, back in I think early fall last year, City Council tasked staff with reviewing and bringing forward proposals relating to the policies we use for our athletic fields. We have conducted considerable analysis in the intervening months, and I'm very grateful that we worked with Sports Facilities Associates, and we have Susie here, who you will meet later during the presentation. And they have helped us through this process, which is an ongoing one. I want to be clear about that. We're not at the end of this yet. We are at the end of the beginning, I guess. And really, it's for you to decide what happens next. There is no pressure from us. We are not seeking to rush you into decision-making on this one. And I'd really implore you to give it some thought and to delve deep into the issues, because the implications from some of the changes that you will see are pretty far-reaching. They will change the way we do business. And I would suggest to you there will probably be people who are currently users of our facilities who will not like those changes. And I'm just being honest with you up front. Unless we're willing to accept that, then we may be wasting our time, and I don't want us to do that. So please delve deep, ask questions. I suppose by way of context, if we can just go back to where we started, you have been very clear that you expect us to maximize the use that we make of the facilities that the city has invested heavily in. You've also made it clear that you want us to do that in the context of meeting local need, but also maximizing the return to the local economy from a focus on sports tourism. And you may have noticed the note that I put on the latest variance report that shows the uptick on hot taxes. I would suggest that's not by accident and is a fruit of the labours of the CVB in maximising returns from sports tourism. But that's for another day. That's not for right now. Today is about our policies that are used on a daily basis by the Parks and Recreation staff to allocate fields and to charge people for the use thereof. I want to thank Carrie and all her team for the work they put into this. They've taken the lead on it. And I also want to thank Tracy and the team at CVB for their invaluable advice and support. That's really all I have, Mayor. I would ask you to leave it to the end, so let Carrie finish with the presentation and leave it at the end, and we'll answer all the questions. And if we can't, that's okay. We may not have all the answers today. We can come back to you on this. To use the awful cliche, but it's, I think, appropriate in the circumstances. This is a marathon, not a sprint. I'll hand it over to Carrie.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Carrie, as you start in your presentation, you know, when you get towards the end, and I haven't fast forward to the tail end, but Council, at the end of the day, staff's going to be looking for clear direction from us, and it may not be clear. It may not be crystal clear, but it may be a combination of various things. It may be, you know, different things that we want to look at. So. And to the point, this isn't something we have to fix tonight. So it can be something that we can still further discussion, get more data, come back and move forward. But at the end of the day, I hope that we have some direction so we can give some clear direction as you guys move forward. Thanks. With that, Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Brownlees. That was a fantastic introduction. We're in a really great spot here in Pearland. We have a fantastic inventory of athletic fields, and we've grown tremendously, not only in our athletic fields, but in the number of athletic leagues and programs that we offer over the last decade. And so with that growth comes the need for change, and that's why we're here. We've listened to your priorities and what we've heard you saying, and this is exactly why we're here today. We want to look at the ways that we can address that growth for Pearland community. How can we maximize the use of our fields? We have a long wait list of people wanting to rent our fields that we have to turn away regularly. There's a huge demand for offering more athletic leagues. And so in order for us to meet this additional demand, to improve our cost recovery and look at ways that we can increase our economic impact, our policies have to change. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I think that Mr. Brownlees and the mayor hit on it. In order for us to move forward, we are looking for your consensus. And so what we're going to present today are the recommendations in order for us to go from where we're at today to be able to meet this additional need. And then how we get there is really up to you, whether we want to go and implement every one of these policy recommendations, or we want to phase that in, or whether we want to change those strategic priorities and meet somewhere in the middle on those things. So what we're presenting to you today is we stand behind these recommendations, and we believe that this will get us where we hear you wanting to go. But if after you hear the impact that this is going to have on our organizations, you decide to be somewhere else in the middle, we are okay with that as well. There's a lot of right ways to do these things. So with that, I actually have to progress my slideshow. I want to talk a little bit about the background, why we created the policies, what situation we were in when we created these policies, and then we're going to talk about why we're going to change the process that we went through, and then we'll get into talking about what those policy recommendation changes are, the impact that those will have on our organizations, and then we'll open it up for questions. So just looking back to 2011, that's when we created our athletic field use policies. At that time, we had 4 softball fields at Centennial Park, and we had open grass, just open space at Independence Park that was used for soccer. The idea at that time was to identify organizations within the community that were providing quality recreational leagues and support them by providing access to field space at a very low cost. The organization's volunteers would maintain the fields and have primary use for their programs. The city would only get involved in capital improvements or when repairs were required. Since that time, communities across the country have seen a significant growth in recreation and competitive youth sports at the local level, as well as an explosion of sports tourism. In addition, we now have 29 athletic fields versus the 4 that we had in 2011. This growth has significantly increased the demand for our sports fields. Under the RSA model that we established in 2011, where sports organizations were maintaining and scheduling the fields, we learned that, 1, the level of maintenance performed by the volunteer organizations was not at the level necessary for hosting athletic tournaments, and secondly, the groups monopolized the use of the fields, making it very difficult for us to schedule tournaments and or any other rentals on the fields because they were always being utilized by the RSAs. So this is just a real quick snapshot of how we got from 4 fields to the 29 fields, and ultimately once Hickory Slough Phase 2 is complete, we'll have 35 athletic fields here in Pearland. It's important to note that those additional fields at Hickory Slough, once those are completed, we're going to have 12 multi-purpose fields, which will enhance our tournament capabilities significantly, and it's going to strengthen Pearland's position as a premier sports destination within the region. It's also important to note that while we don't have 12 softball fields at any one location, the combination of our fields between the sports complex at Shadow Creek Ranch and Centennial Park make Pearland a very attractive location for softball tournaments as well. This slide shows some of the growth, like as we built, I mentioned, as we built the fields, so has our programming has also increased. Our field inventory has allowed us to now oversee an average of 5,000 athletic field rentals annually. We host an average of 10 to 15 athletic tournaments. We also offer a wide range of athletic programs, including leagues, camps, and clinics. Some of these leagues include our Miracle Leagues, cricket, rugby, adult and youth flag football, adult softball, and even a unified sports league for athletes with special needs. Additionally, the department manages 4 recognized sports associations, or we will refer to them as RSAs moving forward. Pearland Youth Lacrosse, Pearland Girls Softball Association, Ling Ling Soccer Academy, and Shadow Creek Soccer Club. To further enhance our recreational opportunities here in Pearland, the department also collaborates with various organizations such as K5 Sports, JCX Tennis, Soccer Shots, Pearland Hurricanes, Under Armour, Under the Lights. These organizations provide additional recreational leagues for our community, and if they weren't providing them, then we might have to otherwise. We've also included just a quick financial snapshot, just showing where, with what we're offering today and with the way that our policies exist today, we're sitting right at a 46% cost recovery in regards to our athletic field complexes, and that includes the maintenance of those and the operations of those fields. So why is change so important? In addition to council setting some strategic priorities, it may appear that we have a lot of really great things going on, and we really do. However, there's still a huge unmet need that with some adjustments to our operational efficiencies, we're going to be able to accommodate that need. First of all, we want to maximize the use of our facilities to accommodate this growing demand. As a community, we want to ensure that we provide equitable access to high-quality recreational programs that develop our youth mentally, socially, and physically, and that we're developing athletes who will eventually progress into some more competitive sports and potentially move into our high school sports programs and even our college programs. With the explosion of sports tourism right now, sometimes the financial benefit of bringing some of those competitive sports programs onto our field, if we don't, from a policy standpoint, prioritize the use of recreational programs, then those could go away. So we want to make sure that that's a priority. Did you have a question? Okay, I thought maybe you wanted to. Okay, good. Okay, cool. Sorry. And then we also want to focus on enhancing our cost recovery and increasing our economic impact through sports tourism. So as a first step in the process to effectively implementing this operational change, we identified the need to audit our policies, take a look at our fees, and also our operational procedures. And we decided that it was going to be really important to develop a strategic operating plan. The plan would be presented, we plan to present this plan to you in 2 different phases. The first phase is what we're going to share here today, and it includes our recommendations for adjustments to our athletic field use policies, which include the RSAs. We're going to present some market adjustments to our field use and tournament fees, and we're going to make recommendations for priority scheduling. The outcome of today's discussion will then drive the second phase of this project, which includes field cost recovery targets, maximum capacity assessments, sports tourism strategies, and recommendations for organizational structure necessary to achieve that maximum utilization. So realizing that it was time for change, the first thing that we did was looked internal. We started determining what data we had access to. We evaluated what was working, what wasn't, and we started brainstorming potential solutions. While I believe our team consists of a lot of fantastic leaders in the athletic industry, it was important that we not only look internal, but we looked external to see what was going on within our region and beyond. So our team initiated several meetings with parks and recreation agencies across the greater Gulf Coast region to understand their approaches to handling this increased demand and to conduct market analysis of the fees. Through this exploration, it revealed that our challenges here in Pearland are not unique. While many organizations in the Houston region still continue to permit RSA use and manage and allow the RSAs to manage their athletic complexes, they are actively considering restructuring options and are really excited to see where we end up. So because we didn't necessarily find that golden ticket or that model that we wanted to follow, we decided that it was even more important for us to take a look outside of the Houston area and within, throughout the state and throughout the country, and really look at what else was going on to make sure that the recommendations that we present to you are in line with what other organizations are doing and what's trending in throughout the country. So at that point, we decided to engage sports facilities advisors to help us with developing the strategic operating plan and to help us identify the things that we needed to change in order to meet our goals. So SFA has led the sports industry in operational planning, site development, and building sports tourism since 2003. We asked them to come on board and talk about ways that we could drive that economic impact and enhance our operational efficiencies. So today I've invited Susie Fisher-Reeder. She is our project manager for this plan with SFA. And so I want to turn it over to Susie for just a few minutes to talk about the trends that they are seeing and the research that she's done that's driving these recommendations that we're going to present to you today.
Thank you, Carrie. So very excited to be here. Thank you for having me today. My background is in local government and parks and recreation. I've been with sports facilities about 3.5 years. I work somewhere between 50 and 100 different entities a year, mostly public. I do have a couple of private clients, but you are not alone in this. And so as we dove into some of your existing data, what your master plan said, some of those annual reports, really diving into the demographics, the socioeconomics of your region, comparing those with what I see across the country, regionally and nationally, looking at what some of those benchmark cities are, so comparing those to groups you have here within Texas and then facilities that are outside of that and that are really tourism driven or sports tourism driven, but also serve local needs. We dove into all of that, looked at mobilytic data for your facilities and compared those as well. So as we dove into each of these items, you have amazing growth potential here and in your region with the demographics. You've got somewhere between 1% and 5% of potential demographic change between what we look at as a local population between that 10, 15, 30 minute, and then we go all the way up to 240 minutes is where we look at for a tournament and how you could bring those people in regionally. So truly to understand that, understand what that competitive position assessment is here in your region, how many other facilities have that 8 to 10 to 16 field capacity, whether that's on multi-purpose or on diamond field, how you fit into that realm, but truly how you meet the local needs of your teams first, as we dove in and looked at also the facility users and the group. So there is much more to come. There's lots of backup that Carrie and her team have been given, and we are still working with them through this process. But just to understand that we are very much data-driven, and there's lots of data behind all of the information that she's still to share in this phase 1 of the process.
All right, thank you. And yes, you will receive a lot more information with the final plan. We mentioned it previously, but that we're going to present this information in 2 different phases, and the reason for that is, one, if we tried to present it all at one time, it would just be so overwhelming. Secondly, the information and the consensus that you all come to today will drive some of those recommendations in the second phase. So Susie will be here. She'll be able to answer some questions later as well. But just keep in mind that the second phase, we'll start talking about some additional revenue generation recommendations, a more in-depth dive of the field cost recovery targets. We're going to talk more in the next phase about the maximum capacity assessments and some of those sports tourism strategies. Today, again, just focusing on the policies, we'll dive right into some of those policy recommendations. Our first recommendation is going to be to add an additional an additional user category. So right now, Parks and Recreation currently has 3 different types of users. One is a recognized sports association. The second one are tournament rentals, and then general use rentals. And so we work with a lot of organizations. I mentioned several of them earlier that provide really well-organized recreational leagues that are very important to our community, but they don't qualify for, the organizations themselves don't qualify for recognized sports association status for a variety of reasons, but they still run a very high-quality program. So the way that we prioritize the use right now is recognized sports associations get first priority. General use rentals get second priority, and then the third priority is our tournament rentals. We're proposing to add another user category for partner associations. These partner associations would then ultimately receive the second level of priority status. So it would be RSAs, partner associations, general rentals, and then we'll talk about tournaments and how we're going to prioritize those a little bit more in detail. They're not going to be last, but there's a little bit more explanation around that. So I'll talk about that in just a minute. But allowing us to do this, so some of the organizations, I'll just mention a couple of them, for example, so you can relate. Shadow Creek Baseball. That's not affiliated. It's a separate organization. Shadow Creek Soccer Club is the 501c3 that runs soccer at Hickory Slough. Shadow Creek Baseball is a separate. It is still under the term Shadow Creek Sports, but it is a separate organization. They run a really high quality, very recreational baseball program at the sports complex at Shadow Creek Ranch. Right now, they're categorized as general rentals. So they're having to compete for field space to run an actual league with somebody that just wants to run a practice. And from an operational standpoint, that's very challenging for them to do because they can't plan out a well-developed league when we're opening up fields for rent a month before. And so halfway through their league, they don't even know if they're going to have fields. So this is why we're proposing this secondary category. And this would ensure a much better facilitation and planning for those organizations. So in order to qualify for partner association status, the organization would be required to have 51% of their participants be Pearland residents. They may be for-profit or nonprofit, and they may have paid administrative staff and coaching. We see, there's a lot of value in these nonprofit organizations that have 100% volunteer boards, and those organizations should fall under the Recognized Sports Association category, and they should get the lowest of prices. But for these organizations that are running very high-quality programs, we want to find a place for them as well. And then one more thing regarding the PAs, they may provide intermediate as well as competitive level programming. So their primary use might be recreation, but then there's benefit in these intermediate and competitive programs as well, because that's how kids advance, that's how athletes advance and then move into some of those high school and college level programs. So here's a real quick snapshot of the difference, the comparison. So you see a Recognized Sports Association and a PA both have to have residency requirements. RSA would be must have their nonprofit designation. The PA could have paid staff where an RSA could not. Both organizations would be required, or both associations would be required to run a full league on those fields where they're applying for designation. So that in a league consisting of games and practices. And all of the organizations would be required to use the fields only during the times that they reserve the fields, and so there would be no more just use them, we turn over the keys to you and you use them whenever you want. And then the PAs, the partner associations would be allowed to have the intermediate and competitive level play. So our next recommendation is going to be to enhance the qualification criteria for an RSA. The recreational leagues provided by RSAs offer significant public benefit, and therefore we significantly subsidize based on our cost recovery model. Because of that level of public benefit, we subsidize some of the cost with tax dollars for those programs. Because of this level of subsidy, these organizations must provide the largest public benefit and adhere to the strictest standards. So for those reasons, we're proposing the following changes to the RSA qualification criteria. We're proposing that 70% of the players must be Pearland residents. We did include the ETJ areas when we count residency, and the reason that we do that for the RSAs is because those athletes, those student athletes that live in the ETJ will ultimately feed into Pearland school systems, and so we wanted to make sure that they had opportunities for those quality recreational programs. This is an increase from 60% required in the existing policy. We're proposing to add a requirement that 75% of these organization board members must be Pearland residents. The existing policy doesn't have a requirement for board members to be Pearland residents. And so this policy change will ensure that those who are making decisions about programs that impact our residents are actually Pearland residents. We're proposing that an RSA, well, this has already been in there. It's not a new requirement, but RSAs must be nonprofit and they must be affiliated with a governing body such as Little League, STISA, etc. The coaches and board members and any administrative staff must be volunteered unpaid. That's not a change. That's still consistent, but we will strictly enforce that. Organizations that are applying for RSA status must operate a recreational league consisting of both practices and games. At the athletic complex, they're applying for RSA status 4. The previous policy implied this. However, it's not clearly articulated, and we currently have RSAs that are only using city facilities for overflow practices. The existing policy, the existing RSA policy, does allow organizations that offer recreational programs to also offer intermediate and or competitive leagues. When they apply for their RSA status, there's this difference in price. So they get one price for their recreational program, and then they pay a different price for their more competitive program. Administratively, this is almost impossible for us to enforce. Organizations will reserve field space for their recreational program, and then they use it all day long for their competitive program. In their competitive program, they're charging much higher dollar amounts for registering for those programs. And so it's, you might have a recreational program taking up this much of the field, and then the competitive program would take up this much of the field. And so it's very challenging. So that's what's driving this recommendation, and that if you offer a recreational program as well as competitive or intermediate programs, that you would no longer be eligible for RSA status, but you could apply for partner association status for your whole program. This sits at a higher cost or a fee for that usage. And then the last recommendation is, this has been a policy, but we're going to strictly enforce this as well. The original intent of the RSA agreements was to give free reign of the fields to RSAs. If we're going to be able to accommodate the increased demand for field space and improve our cost recovery, then we've got to start maximizing the utilization of our fields. And so all organizations, including the RSAs, will be required to submit their schedules and tell us exactly when they're utilizing the fields. We have a lot of times where we're telling rentals, organizations that are requesting to rent our fields, that we're completely booked and we have nothing available. But then if you go out to those fields that are reserved by some of the RSAs, there's no one on them. They're not using them. And so we're asking for, don't just block time blocks, tell us exactly when you're going to be out there. And then we also are recommending that within these policy changes that an organization applying for RSA status, when they're running a league, they can have an opening season tournament, a closing season tournament, and then one skill development clinic, and those will all be included in that league. Anything beyond that, they were going to have to rent field space as general field rentals, and this will prevent these RSAs from using some of their from scheduling their more profitable programs and camps and clinics on the fields during their RSA time. All right, so our next recommendation is to establish an RSA and PA review committee. This committee would be comprised of volunteers from each of the affiliated associations. It would include some of our Parks Board members, as well as Parks and Recreation staff. This group would review all applications and ensure that we're following an equitable process. The committee would be made up of representatives from a diverse background and perspectives, including members with experience in youth athletics, community engagement, as well as administrative oversight. And the goals of this committee would be to review each of the applications and agreements that are submitted and to evaluate those with compliance of our policies. This group would award priority within different categories based on a scoring rubric. They would establish and review an annual RSA and Partner Association scorecard to determine the level of compliance with their agreement. And then when we have organizations that are not complying with our policies, this organization would recommend probationary status or loss of those agreements in a case where RSAs and PAs fail to meet those terms. All right, so our next recommendation is to designate reservation time blocks for weeknight use. So presently, Parks and Recreation facilitates field reservations for RSAs and rentals in mostly 2-hour time blocks. The preferred time that we hear from all of our rentals is that I want to rent the fields from 6 to 8 p.m. Well, what that does is that limits us to one rental per night, because you're not typically going to have somebody that rents from 4:30 or 4 to 5 or prior to 6 o'clock, and you're not going to have someone that wants to rent the fields after 8 p.m. And so it really limits us to just one rental a night. So what we're proposing with these time blocks is that we add a 5:30 to 7:30 and a 7:30 to 9 p.m. or 9:30 p.m. Time blocks. It's just a small shift from what they're actually requesting. However, it will give us the opportunity to potentially double our weeknight rentals and accommodate a much larger number of rentals, as well as potentially double our athletic field rental revenue. The next policy recommendation is to establish a timeline for RSAPA tournament and general rental reservations. I mentioned earlier that I would talk a little bit more about tournaments and how we're going to prioritize tournament use. This chart shows a proposed 18-month timeline for field reservations. For weekend use, we're working towards prioritizing tournaments as the top priority. This recommendation would allow tournaments to book up to 3 years in advance. But as we worked through, how does that work? At what point do we release those weekends that aren't booked for our local users? And what is that impact going to have on our local users? We decided to take more of a phased approach with this. So when you're looking at the weekend dates, we are going to prioritize tournaments that, one, coordinate with the Pearland Convention and Visitors Bureau for hotel accommodations. We're looking for tournaments that have more room night potential, and also those that have a proven track record of hosting successful events. So as we move in this direction, we are going to reserve, since we typically will hold, on average, we host between, like I said, 10 to 15 tournaments a year. Of those, at least 10 of them have some really high economic impact results from those. And so we're going to prioritize those first 10. And then in the first year, we're going to add 4 additional tournament dates. And we'll be looking for those tournaments that, have the most impact for us. And then we'll start scheduling those out. Now, once we reach the point where we have filled all 4 of those spaces that we have held, then we'll take a look at where do we go next? How can we open up more weekends, and what impact will that have? What we're hoping is by switching to this two rental reservation blocks each night, some of those things that are happening on the weekends right now for our local league play, practices, games, that type of thing, that those will be able to shift to the weeknights. And ideally, in a perfect world, Monday through Thursday would be local use, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday would be tournaments every weekend. Again, this is going to be a very phased approach. We'll start easing into it, and each year we'll have to look at, okay, we added 4 more. What does this look like now? And make those decisions going forward.
Carrie, can I ask real quickly, are you saying predetermined tournament dates as in predetermined based on the tournaments coming to us, or predetermined as we have a calendar and we ask the tournaments to fit into those blocks?
So of the 10 that we're currently hosting, we know those dates, and we'll go ahead and get those 10 on. And then the others, we're going to pick four weekends a year that we're going to hold. And what that's going to allow us to do is when a tournament comes to us and says, we'd like to host this tournament, we can say, well, do any of these dates work for you? In the event that those 4 dates don't work for that tournament organizer, then maybe we can use those open weekends to swap our local users around and try to reach an agreement. And then if it just doesn't work for that tournament organizer, then we'll get them on the books for the next year.
Yeah, and I want to remind the council, I think we are using some CVB funding for bathroom facilities at one of the parks. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, we have to maintain, we
had to achieve 10 tournaments.
And that's where those 10 tournaments are coming from. So I just remind that we have those on the calendar, and we know what those are going to be from year to year. So,
and so as we're looking at more of those, instead of there's a lot of tournaments, a lot of local tournaments, a lot of tournaments that don't put heads in beds, and so we're really going to try to get away from those. And if we're limited on number of weekends and we're taking away from our local recreation use, then we want to make sure that the impact of those tournaments that we're plugging in on the fields, has the greatest value for us as a community. So then moving on to our weekdays, Monday through Thursday and or Friday, we're going to prioritize, and then the weekends that are open, of course, too. But our first priority will be recognized sports associations. Recognized sports associations will be awarded in May of each year, and then RSAs will be able to, at that time, block all of their fields for the fall, spring, and summer seasons, so September through August timeframe. You'll be able to go ahead and get all of those on the dates, or all of those dates on the books. Our partner associations will be awarded in June, and then at that time, whatever dates are left, they will be able to fill in their dates. And then priority 3 will be open up to our general rentals, and those will be available for booking in July for the September through August timeframe. All right, I know this is the part you all have been waiting for. We're going to start talking fees. So pricing our athletic field rentals competitively is really...
Gary, I'm sorry. Out of curiosity, my head's already spinning with all this. So before you go too far, would it be okay if we go back and ask questions so you kind of get an idea before we go, so maybe you can address some of those questions in here, or do you want to continue?
I think some of the questions I might answer them when I start talking about some of the impacts. So If you can just kind of make a note of them and hold on to them, and then we can address those at the end. So when we start talking about fees, we want to make sure that our fees are priced competitively. We want to make sure that our fees are in line with the market and that we're competitive in that market, so we don't turn event organizers away. But then we also want to make sure that we have a fair balance to where our local programs can afford to use our fields as well. And so our first recommendation when we start talking about fees is to transition from the Recognized Sports Association player-based fee structure at $10 per player per season, and transition away from that into an hourly field rental rate. We're proposing to remove the deposit that we charge. We currently charge a $500 deposit. In all of my history and time here, we've never had to retain a deposit, and so we're proposing to move away from that. And then we're also proposing to take the monthly utility fee of $150 a month and adjust in the hourly field rental fee, absorb that utility fee into that. And why that's important, you'll see this in when we start talking about the impact to our users, whether you are using the field for a very small percentage of the time, or you're using it, for 90% of the time, you're still paying that same monthly utility fee. So by incorporating that into the actual hourly fee, we'll make that fee more equitable for the users based on their actual use of those fields. And so by transitioning to this, to moving away from the per player per season and charging actual by the hour, it's going to create an incentive for these RSAs to give us back the field space that they're not using. So right now an RSA, they're planning out their season and they think, oh, we're going to have, and I'm just throwing an example out here, 200 players for this season. So I'm going to need the fields Monday through Friday from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. every day. And then their registration happens and their registration comes in a little bit lower. We'll just keep the extra fields because it doesn't cost us very much. So we'll just keep those extra fields in case we need them. And then our fields are sitting empty. So by us charging by the hour for these fields, it creates that additional incentive for them to give us those fields back. We will give, after their registration, they'll tell us when their registration closes, and we'll give them a window that they have to finalize their schedules, and then tell us, we don't need these any longer, and then we won't charge them for those fees. So what we're proposing right now is a $10 per hour per field for natural grass fields, and then $20 an hour per field for the synthetic turf fields. We are proposing that we create a fee structure for that new user category for the partner associations. The partner associations will pay $15 an hour in this proposed model. They will pay $15 an hour per field plus a $10 an hour per field utility fee when they need the lights turned on. And then for synthetic fields, it would be $30 and $10. This is a $5 an hour plus utility fee increase for the partner associations. And then the next category is our general rental rates. And so we're proposing basically all of the fees will be increasing by $5. They will still pay a utility fee for the lights. And then you see in this category, there's a resident and non-resident rate for general rentals. The reason that we don't have a resident, non-resident rate for the RSAs and PAs is because they have a residency requirement built into their policy in order for them to be able to qualify. So there's just one rate for that. And then I wanted to mention that when we compared, Susie mentioned it earlier, but when we looked at all of our comparison communities, some of the communities that we compared our athletic field rates to were Carl Barton Junior Park in Conroe. We looked at Katy, we looked at South Post Oak Sportsplex in Fort Bend, and also Friendswood and Deer Park. And our fees are right in line it's tough because they don't all have the exact same types of use. Some of them have RSA use, some of them don't have, they just have general rental use. And so we looked at all of those, and we feel very confident with the way that we're increasing our fees. The RSA rates are very similar to Deer Park. The partner association fees, since that's something a little bit new, it kind of sits in between.
So Carrie, this $200 on slide 21 is the proposed, the yellow marker slide 21
Yep,
is
so-
the,
That's moving into tournament fees.
Okay.
So when
Just
we
the
took a look at tournament fees, we compared, again, some of the same communities, and it shows that we are right in line with Deer Park, Friendswood, Katy. We're exactly the same as Deer Park right now, and then just slightly lower than Katy. But one of the big differences to note there is that when you reserve our fields for a tournament, it comes with 0 staff. We unlock the gates, and then the organizers are responsible for the restroom maintenance, the trash, trash removal, as well as anything else that they need out there on site. So what we're proposing and we'll slip to the next slide for our tournaments, we're proposing to increase our daily tournament rate from $200 to $225. It still keeps us right in line with the market, but we're proposing to add basic trash removal and restroom service within that price. It gives us enough additional revenue that we can provide that cost or that service to the event organizers. Now, if an event organizer wants to have the fields prepped, or if they want us to drag the fields throughout the day or stripe the fields, those will still be additional costs, and those will be based on the size of their tournament and the number of staff that we have to bring out to provide those services. This is just your basic stopping into the restrooms and pulling the trash a few times throughout the day. All right, so this is just kind of a summary. I know that it is a lot. I'm going to jump in and I'm going to talk about the impact, and then we will open it up for questions. But these policies do align with what we've heard your strategic priorities to be. They will allow us to accommodate more rentals. They will ensure that we have a fair and balanced field utilization between the competitive and recreation programs. They'll put checks and balances in place to make sure that all of our organizations are complying with our policies. These recommendations will improve our overall cost recovery and ensure that our fees are in line with the market, and they will ultimately increase our economic impact. So the next slide is a snapshot. I showed a snapshot previously of where we sit right now. This is a breakdown of our expenses and our revenue for our athletic complexes. And shows the comparison of where we're at now, and once we implement some of these policy changes, where we can move. And so these recommendations incorporate just a 35% increase in our rentals in year 1 as a result of offering the 2 rental time blocks on weeknights. This change does have the potential for us to double our weeknight rental, but we wanted to make sure that what we were proposing for year 1 was very realistic and conservative. The increased salary, these recommendations show an increased salary expenses. So one of the things that if we're going to switch as we transition away from the RSAs just kind of having unlimited use of our fields, and we have a lot more organizations that will be using fields as they are permitted, we have to have staff out in our parks making sure that the right people are on the right fields. Right now at the sports complex at Shadow Creek Ranch, we see a lot of issues where we have permitted organizations to use the fields, and then another organization comes out and says, no, I want to use the fields. I'm going to share this field with you. And then it just creates a lot of issues. And so by not having enough staff out in the facilities to make sure that the right people are using the right organizations, we're seeing the police having to be called frequently, and we're not providing a high level of service. So as we start moving in the direction of controlling our fields more, we actually have to have the staff out there to do that. So in the FY25 budget, there will be 2 positions that we are requesting, additional part-time athletic attendants to help us monitor the use of those fields, as well as an athletic manager position. So though the cost of those positions is included in these recommendations. Increased revenue from the recommended fee and user categories has been taken into account. Estimated impact of hosting 4 new athletic tournaments, so the additional rental revenue is included in these estimates. And then we wanted to show an increase in economic impact. However, that can vary widely depending on the tournament. And so what we did, looking at the roughly $3.3 million in economic impact in 2023, that was based on 8 tournaments. We had booked 10. Of those, a few of them canceled, and so we actually ended up only, due to rain, so we ended up only hosting 8 tournaments. And so we took the average of those 8 tournaments. Some were higher, some were a lot lower. So we took the average of those, and then we just multiplied that out by the 14 tournaments that we can we would be able to host in the future. So that's how those numbers were developed. So now looking at the individuals, our actual organizations that are utilizing the fields. Pearland Youth Lacrosse is a nonprofit organization. They've successfully offered youth lacrosse in Pearland for over 10 years. Their organization currently has 48 players, and they primarily operate at the Hickory Sluice Sportsplex. Based on their proposed policy changes, we don't anticipate any significant impact to Pilex other than a slight increase in their fees. And I say, as we, I want to share how we came up with the impact. We looked at all of their, with all of our organizations. We looked at their historical use. We looked at things that we've heard from them in the past. Our entire team that's here tonight, we all came together and we tried to poke holes in every single thing to consider what are these things that are going to impact these, how are these policy changes going to impact these organizations? And we haven't had conversations with them yet. We wanted to have these conversations with you first, but we want to be mindful that what we're doing, that these organizations offer fantastic programs for our community, and we want them to be successful now and into the future. And so this is just the first phase, and this is everything that we could possibly think of that how this would impact these organizations. But then one of our next steps is going to be to sit down with these organizations and have these conversations. And if they tell us something that we never considered that's going to significantly change their impact, that could interfere with them being able to continue their program, we need to be mindful of that, and we need to revisit that at that time. So I'm not saying that there's not something that might come up, but we have done our due diligence to try to think of everything. So in regards to Pilex, we don't anticipate any significant changes. Their revenue the fees that we charge them will increase from approximately $1,400 to about $2,700 annually. And if you want to take a look at their a comprehensive look at how the fee changes will financially impact each organization, we did include, as part of their RSA applications, they're required to provide us with their financial statements. And so we did include those in the Thursday packet memo, as well as attach them to the agenda request for you all to take a look at. Ling Ling Soccer Academy is a nonprofit organization that was established by a group of parents that are dedicated to recreational soccer. They provide a really high quality program for youth and adults, and they've got about 80 players currently enrolled in their program, and they primarily use the sports complex, or the Hickory Sluice Sportsplex. Staff expect minimal impact to Ling Ling Soccer Academy as well, and in fact their fees are actually going to go down a little bit. We talked about that monthly utility fee. Based on this organization's use and the time of year that they primarily use the fees, and not having to pay that $150 a month fee, their fees are going to go down just a little bit. We think that they'll decrease from $3,300 to $2,500 annually. All right, so Pearland Girls Softball Association is another nonprofit organization that's successfully run a girls softball program in Pearland for many years. They operate at Centennial Park and the Pearland Dads Club. They were first awarded RSA status in 2014. Initially, with the addition of the 2 new fields, so they used the 4 fields at Centennial, and then they used, I think, 3 fields at the Dads Club. With the addition of the 2 fields in 2018 at Centennial Park, it was expected that at that time PGSA would move their full program to Centennial Park. However, at the time, due to the lack of on-site storage and the organization's responsibility for maintenance, this move was really challenging for them. But even after Parks and Recreation assumed responsibility for maintenance, PGSA chose to continue using Centennial Park only for practices. They do not host any games at Centennial Park. The current policy requires an RSA to provide recreation service or meet a community recreational need. And it mentions teams and games, but it does not specify that the organization must offer a league inclusive of games and practices at the designated facility. So the recommended policy change would require PGSA to run a full program, including games and practices at the complex, in order to receive those significantly discounted prices. If PGSA only needs fields per practice, then they would be required to rent fields at the general rental rate, similar to other organizations that do for practice, but then they play games elsewhere. If PGSA were to move their entire league to Centennial Park, they would qualify for RSA status, and they would pay the hourly RSA rate. Based on the proposed policy changes, historical use estimates, and information collected from PGSA's financial statements submitted with their RSA application, we prepared a few scenarios to reflect those policy changes and the financial impacts on PGSA. So the first scenario that we have up here is absolutely no changes. PGSA pays the city roughly $8,000 a year in fees. Based on their financial statements, it appears that they're paying PGSA approximately $120,000 a year for fees to use that facility. The scenario number 2 reflects the transition from the per player per season fee to the $10 per hour fee. However, this particular scenario does not require the organization to host a full league at the complex. So if they wanted to continue, if per policy we choose to continue to allow PGSA to only use Centennial Park for practices, in this scenario, they would remain RSA status, priority level 1 for scheduling. However, other nonprofit organizations that rent fields at Centennial Park and host their games somewhere else would then also be eligible for RSA status and could potentially come in with higher numbers or a more developed program and could take this out from underneath PGSA. In this scenario, PGSA would they would start paying the $10 an hour for their field use. So based on their historical field use, their fees that they would pay to the city would be about $14,000. And then they would still continue to pay the Dad's Club the roughly $100,000. So their total would be $134,000 total combined if they chose to go this route. And you all as the council decided that you wanted to allow them to continue to maintain their RSA status without having to provide leagues and games at the complex. Scenario number 3 is the one that's most closely in line with the policy recommendations. This reflects PGSA, because they only use the fields for practice, they would no longer be eligible for RSA status or PA status. They would be able to reserve the fields at regular rental rates. Their annual fee to use the city facility would increase from about $8,000 to $42,000. Combine that with the fees that they're already paying at the Dad's Club, their total cost for running their program would be about $162,000 annually. And the last scenario that we ran for PGSA would be PGSA moving their entire league, games and practices to Centennial Park. They would maintain their RSA status, they would receive the lowest rental rates, and under this scenario, PGSA's annual rental rate would increase, what they pay the city would increase from $8,000 to $32,000. However, they would no longer be paying the Dad's Club the $100,000+ a year. They would no longer be responsible for maintenance of any of the fields. They would just come out and use the fields. We have had conversations with PGSA over the years to try to encourage them to move their whole program to our fields, and they have not been interested in doing that. Some of their concerns in the past were, well, there's no maintenance building to store all of our equipment. Well, you don't have to maintain the fields anymore, so that's no longer an issue. If they chose to move their whole program to Centennial Park, they would benefit tremendously by an overall cost savings. It would save them, they would be paying they'd be paying $32,000 instead of $162,000 for their whole program. It's a significant cost savings. They would not have any maintenance responsibilities any longer. I mean, occasionally for their games, they might want to stripe or drag the fields, and they could do that. They would have minimal equipment storage and maintenance, and they wouldn't have to keep up with that anymore. Sometimes the PGSA has expressed the need of wanting to invest in capital, and that's why they like being at the Dad's Club, because they want to take the money that they earn off of their programs and build batting cages, and they want to put brand new lights up on the fields and things like that. Well, they would still have that capital improvement opportunity in our fields. We would welcome that, and we would work with them to be able to install some of those things, and so that's still an opportunity there. The only negative factor for PGSA that we can think of would be that some weekends would no longer be available because we're going to be running tournaments on the fields on weekends. So if they could build their program around what we're working on for our tournament model, this would be a huge win for them if they move their program over to our facilities. Again, there could be something.
And Carrie, real quick, if they went with scenario 4, it would actually be about a savings of $90,000, because currently, all in, they're in the 120 to 125 range, so, or 100, yeah, maybe $100,000 savings. They're around 130 total with us and their existing fees at the Dad's Club. So the 160 something would be that scenario 4, but from current,
From
They would-
current,
yeah.
yes, that's correct. All right, so moving on, Shadow Creek Soccer Club is a nonprofit organization based in Pearland. They offer youth soccer programs at Hickory Slough Sportsplex for players of all ages and all skill levels. They've been awarded RSA designation since 2018. Shadow Creek Sports, and I think I mentioned this earlier, Shadow Creek Sports, where they offer the baseball and the competitive soccer and flag football, that's a separate organization. That's not what we're talking about here. This is their nonprofit, Shadow Creek Soccer Club. They are no longer qualified under the new policy recommendations for RSA status for several reasons. And technically, Shadow Creek Soccer Club would no longer qualify for RSA status under our existing policies. So whether we change the policies or not, moving forward, they're no longer qualified. But based on our new policy recommendations, Shadow Creek Soccer has less than 70% of their participants that reside within Pearland. They pay their coaching staff and some of their board members. They provide a combination of recreational, intermediate, and competitive programs. So under the new policy, that would disqualify them. But it's important to mention that Shadow Creek Soccer Club provides a really well-developed quality soccer program for the community. They have, according to their records, they have close to 1,000 players within their organization. So we want to make sure that their program continues to be successful. However, under the new policy recommendations, they would have to apply for PA status. This would allow them to offer both the recreational and competitive leagues. They would still be able to pay their coaches, and they would be able to pay some of their administrative staff. Their residency requirements would then reduce to 51%. Their field priority classification would move from priority 1 to priority 2. Their field use would be restricted only to the times that they reserve those fields, and they would no longer be able to bring out their competitive program at those super recreational subsidized rates. And so they're based on what, I'm going to say this very carefully, based on what Shadow Creek Soccer Club has submitted to us for their historical use, which we have reasons to believe that that's not accurate. So what we're basing this off of is what they have submitted to us as their actual use. Their annual RSA rental fees will increase from $20,000 to $142,000 annually. This does appear to be a substantial increase, but it's important to note that based off of the financial documents that they submitted, they collected almost $1 million in revenue in 2020.
Carrie, on that one, is Shadow Creek Soccer also one of those that's booking fields but then not using it, so we're not able to use those fields?
I think more so to the opposite of that. They're reserving the fields for their recreational programs, and then they're bringing their more competitive programs out. That they're making a significant higher amount of profit. They're hosting a lot of camps, clinics, and leagues that they're telling us, oh no, that's our recreational team out there. It's not.
Okay, fair enough.
Carrie, you cut out a little there at the end. I want to be sure I heard you. You said $1 million in revenue?
What we see, and the financial statement is attached to the information that you've received, that the organization collected $966,798 in revenue in 2021. And that is the most recent financial statement that we have from them.
Thank you.
Okay, I know it's a lot of information. Before I turn it back over to Mr. Brownlees or Mr. Epperson, and we open it up for questions, I just want to touch on again, these policy recommendations, will allow us to move that needle and help increase our facility use. It'll help us improve our cost recovery and also our economic impact. The next steps, hopefully tonight, we can reach consensus on all of these policy recommendations or where you want to be moving forward. And then our next step will be to update the fee ordinance. And so if we have consensus tonight, then we'll be bringing those fees back to you to adopt with the first, for the first reading of the fee ordinance on April 22nd. And then immediately following, we will be updating our operational procedures and our administrative athletic field use policies. We will begin hosting informational meetings with our recognized sports associations to share all of the new policies with them. And then simultaneously, we're going to activate a public communication plan, because what we have seen happen very often in the past is when we communicate changes to either certain individuals within organizations or with their boards, sometimes that same information is not what the community or what their participants hear. So we want to make sure that on our city's website, that we provide access to the public of why we're making the changes, what the impact of those changes are, and why this is important for the community. So we'll have all the facts out there for the public to see. And then we will start working on establishing that RSAPA review committee, and then we'll begin accepting applications and moving forward. We may not hit the May timeframe for accepting those applications. Everything may be pushed just a little bit given where we're at to date, but those are our next steps. So with that, I don't know, Victor, if you want to, or Trent, turn it back over to y'all.
Yeah, happy to take questions. Realize that's a lot of information, and this is purely aspirational on our part. Right. If you're minded to come to some decisions tonight, that's fine. If you're not, that's also fine. We don't want to rush you.
Yeah, and I don't want to put words in the mouth of the council. Obviously, we've got some questions, and I think in fact, a lot of us may have the same questions. So as we kind of go through this, we'll get those questions asked and answered. But yeah, I would probably state that April 22nd may be a little ambitious. I would also probably state that we would need to get out in front of those organizations even before passage, just to understand. And Carrie, I think you said it best. We need to write the narrative because we know the narrative. We don't need to have somebody else write that narrative for us. We're doing this for specific reasons. One, hadn't been changed in forever. So that's part of it. And the other part of it, on page 4 of your slideshow, 46% cost recovery, and that's not the acceptable place where we need to be. And really and truly, one of the questions I wanted to ask council as we start, because I had written down 46, we need to get to 75, and your plan gets to 75, and then the other question is, do we want to get to 100? And if so, how, when, and where? And it goes to how because I would look at 75 as a minimal. 100% is where I think want to get to, but I think that would help you guys as to where we need to take this, right? And back to the council, is it something in 1 year move? Is it a stair-step approach over 2 or 3 years to get there? So it may not even be that we implement these. We may peel it and then up and then up and then up to get to somewhere close to that 100% range. And again, 100% is aspirational. We don't know how many players and everything on a given year. And so that to me would be one of the questions in our game plan moving forward is where do we want to land in, say, 5 years? Where do we want to be? So with that in mind, I'll let council start their questions. I know, Rushi, you wanted to start early on. You want to go? That way you won't take her questions?
Yes, sir. Exactly.
All right, Ms. Mona, take off.
Thank you, Mayor. Great presentation. Thank you, Carrie. I just have a quick question on page 24. I just want to make sure I understand the RSA fees because there's a decrease of about $14,000, but I'm assuming that the new PA fees will cover some of those bases. Is that correct, or that variance?
That is correct. The PA fees would include, you'll have 2 of the existing RSAs that no longer qualify, so the rates that we collect would either fall into general rental rates or PA fees. And the way I built this was Shadow Creek Soccer Club would be a PA, PGSA, Pearland Girls Softball Association, would be a general rental.
Thank you.
Carrie, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. And I just, you said something about the $500 deposit, and that's going away?
We collect a $500 deposit, so if an organization damages a field,
Okay.
or if they violated one of our policies or something like that, we haven't had to restrict somebody's $500 deposit. And honestly, if they damaged a field, it's going to cost us a lot more than $500. And so, rather than that, we'll be implementing the probationary status or revoking their actual use of those fields.
Okay.
And then we would still have measures if they damage the field to take action in that regard.
Well, I wanted to make sure we had some, and this may ultimately be legal in how we write up the agreement, and that's making sure that we've got something in there that if there is legitimate negligence or just absolute intentionality to destroy something, that we have something against that. We can go against whether they, do we require them to have insurance?
Yes.
So at least something that we can go after their insurance, but something to go back on it, and that would be better than the deposit, $500 deposit anyway.
I think, and I don't know the exact language in our existing policy, but there is a statement in there that any damages occurred will be the responsibility of the organization. So, yeah, right in line with what you're talking about.
Sorry.
And what you said, Mayor, about the 75%, I think that's okay for now, but ultimately 100% cost recovery should be, I think, would be.
Yeah, and the
goal.
question is, how do you get there? Do you get there in 1 year? Do you get there in 3? Or do you get there in 5? And yeah.
For shock factor, maybe in 5.
Good question.
And I think some of that may be addressed when we come back with the second phase of the recommendations, when we truly start looking at, what with the direction that we're moving in a policy standpoint, how can we maximize the use of our facilities, and then what does that mean? The certain types of use definitely generate a higher price point than your recreational use, and so we'll provide some different scenarios there.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, first question is, when you said you took an average of the tournaments, Carrie, was there a trend on which type of tournament, whether it was by sport, age, time of year, that yielded more impact, or was it just all over the
We're
place?
based off of the softball tournaments that we hosted in 2013.
Oh, so they were all softball?
We're all softball.
Oh, okay. But you said that it varied widely, and that was just number of participants, or what was it that
It's
you think?
number of participants and where the teams are coming from. That makes a huge difference in the number of hotel stays that they book.
I see. So I guess, is there, well, I guess you'll figure that out. I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds there. But yeah, so we're trying to prioritize, I guess, getting people to come into the city from outside of a certain.
And that's from a policy recommendation, looking at how we prioritize that use. And then again, in the second phase, there'll be some recommendations for sports tourism, where to pull those tournaments from, what our market will sustain, where we can reach out to.
Cool. This is kind of my broader concern that I've had since the beginning of this conversation, which I don't really know. I mean, I think this model seems to address a lot of the issues that I think maybe we've voiced over the years. So I'm thankful for this, and I think it actually seems like it would work fairly well. And I think it addresses maybe some secondary concerns that I have, which is like two things that I have before I go into my overarching concerns. So I'll say for the PGSA, the scenario 4, I have a little bit of concern, a little level of uncomfortability if we're going to potentially pull a tournament away from Dad's Club, because I don't want us to be an entity that's competing with, a private entity. Does that make sense? I mean, I just don't know that that's our role, nor should it be. And I mean, you've heard me say the same thing about even the rec center. So I'm like, if we're going to have it, we need to make it as competitive as you can, because it just doesn't make sense to me that would dissuade somebody from coming in and building if there's an opportunity for private-public partnership, we want to try to, encourage as much private as we can. But conversely, I think what you've done with the Shadow Creek soccer model, where I've said multiple times, I don't like that we're subsidizing, a private entity that is making money kind of off the backs of the taxpayers. So I think you're addressing these concerns, which is really, really good. Just wanted to voice my whatever, secondary concern there. The overarching concern, though, that I had, which I don't really know what we would do to address this, but so if Parks makes up 7.7% of general fund, I think of what if I'm just average homeowner paying whatever taxes I'm paying a year in property taxes. I'm paying roughly $180 a year for the privilege of using our beautiful parks and accessing all of the amenities that go along with that. And I really like the inclusion of the residency requirements and the partner associations, the RSAs. But I don't know, and I understand what you're saying too about the schools with the ETJ, but I just can't get over that $180 a year that the actual residents are paying that everyone else isn't paying. So I kind of feel like the residency requirement shouldn't include the ETJ, that we should be a little stricter, because I don't know really how to close that gap to say that I'm already, as a taxpayer, paying, let's just round up, $200 a year for the parks, and now I'm paying the same essentially as everyone else, because now we switch to this kind of hourly fee. And so I like what we're doing. I just don't know that it really addresses what my primary concern has been kind of this whole time, to really close that gap. And I've made it no secret that I like our kind of user-based fees, right? So the more I'm accessing something, the more I'm paying type thing. But I think there's a higher level of concern with just I'm not paying any tax, period. And then make sure I got everything there. Removal, competitive. Yep, I agree with that. All of my other notes here just say agree. Oh, I did have a question about the current agreement with the RSAs and the future. If they are providing their schedule, Carrie, and they're not showing up, like you said, and it's going empty, or they're switching use, which I guess we're trying to address with this new partner association, do we have a trigger that will cut them off in the future? I mean, does it?
In the future, yes. One of our challenges now is that we don't have enough staff in the park to actually monitor that use. And so at that point, we'll have staff there. If they've reserved to use the fields and 3 times a week they're not showing up, or whatever that frequency is, we'll bring that back to that RSA PA committee, and we'll let them know, and then they can issue either probationary status, or if it's significant of a violation enough, then they can remove their use.
All right, awesome. Other than that, I'm very thankful for this finally getting done. It's been something that you've been bringing up for a couple of years. I know that this isn't easy, so thank you for that, and I'm sure we'll have more comments, questions. So
Good
Thank you.
Yeah, good comments. And on the, I'm not sure I understood the ETJ component, but I do like the increase in actual city and less ETJ, and they have to show that. But I think a lot of these programs, like if they're like Carolyn Girls Softball, or of course their baseball programs, I mean the parent organizations or the national organizations, they just look at an area, and so they draw kids from our ETJ as well as from the city. So I don't know that they can really limit that. No. So I don't have as big a heartache over that as I do, at least if we're increasing the fees and getting more dollars in, we are getting more dollars from people from the ETJ to help offset what homeowners and property owners in the city are already paying. So to me, I think that would be the trade-off, there.
I guess my point was that if I'm not getting priority being one of these organizations,
right?
The percentage is high enough, then why am I paying?
Right. That makes sense.
That's what we found with a lot of the organizations where they have very clear boundaries drawn. Those boundaries include those ETJ areas, and if we exclude those in their qualification status, they're not going to qualify.
Right. So, back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Gary, I'll echo some of the stuff that council has already said, and I'll go a little bit further. I would like to go 100% for sure to recover, but I would say let's do 120 if you can over 5 years. And the one thing I would tell you is maybe put an automatic trigger in there that annually we have an adjustment on these rates. I mean, instead of coming back here every couple of years and people get used to these rates, because this is going to be a shock. I think a lot of these guys are going to come in our council chamber, and I'm sure they'll try to push and convince council to change their minds. But I think it's the right thing to do. I think it just needs to be part of our going forward, right? On slide number 14, I believe you had mentioned something about having board members. If I recall correctly, 75% of the board members are City of Pearland residents. I guess that can be tricky. And what I mean by that, if you have, a board of 4, all you need is 3. So I think maybe you put a minimum of 7 board members or 9 board members, just a fruit for thought. The other thing I'll tell you on slide number 15, what I would tell you, if you can go there. So in my wisdom, on the very bottom where it says committee is compromised, or comparison of Parks and Rec staff, I would ask you to have somebody from the CVB board sit on it. And the reason I'll tell you, in the past, when I was in CVB, and it's been a long time, one of the biggest things I heard was, we can bring all these tournaments to town, but we just can't get the fields. And I like what you had said earlier about going out to these tournaments 3 years out, and then making sure they book up first, and then, the rest of the association would get it. So on that committee, I think it would be good to have maybe a CVB board member, not an employee, but somebody from that CVB that can kind of help you understand what their goal is and how we can implement it. That's just my thought on that. Number 16, I was just kind of curious on slide 16, you said summer was 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. What happens in summer when school's out? Is there going to be a change in schedule here, or is this for 365 days?
So during the summer months, during the daytime hours, similar to on the weekends, we're not going to require the specific time blocks. Those can open up. We don't have the issues then where the prime time is, during league seasons in the evening during the weekdays. And so during the summer, during the day, or even on the weekends when we don't have tournaments booked, it would be just whatever time blocks that they choose.
Okay. And I go to the next slide. One of recently, I'll tell you, we had I guess there's a tournament coming in October in Pearland. And a lot of people use that. October is a busy month for hotels. Now, this tournament that's being held in October, I'll tell you, they're going to have a problem getting rooms in the city of Pearland. Keep in mind, this tournament is supposedly moving from Sugar Land because we're much better. But I think the problem, if I know a little bit about the hotel businesses, October in Houston just tends to be a busy month. Weekends tend to be busy because of better weather. People tend to get married in October. And so between March, April, and May and October, 4 months, I'll tell you from my experience, I don't want tournaments. Believe it or not, I don't want tournaments. March, April, and May, and October. My weekends are packed. So what happens is you bring these tournaments, they end up staying at Hobby. They end up staying in Houston. They're not really having the economic impact in our community as most people think, because they're looking for a lower rate, and we don't want them. We're not going to take them. And second of all, we have about, I believe, Tracy, correct me if I'm wrong, 120 rooms, or 1,200 rooms, sorry. 1,200 rooms in our hotel, in our city, approximately. No hotel is going to give you 1,200 rooms. They're just not. They're going to give you about 30% of their inventory. So do the math. That's maybe about 400 rooms that you will get for a tournament. They're not going to give you the full inventory. So I think that's very important when you do these tournaments that come from out of town that sell you on all these rooms they're going to produce. Well, you only got 1,200. You're only going to get 30%. So really, is it going to be beneficial? So that's just one of the other points. On slide 18, explain to me, so this was interesting to me. You said $10 a field. Does it matter if it's soccer field or if it's baseball or softball field, or are you just saying in general, fields are fields?
Yeah, so the rate for a softball field or for a multi-purpose field would be the same. The difference comes into whether you're renting a natural grass field or a synthetic turf field.
Okay. And I guess I have 2 girls, and we're not athletic. So explain to me, how many fields do normal, I guess, soccer teams would rent? I didn't know, is it just one field, or are they going to have, like, I guess a sports complex? How many fields do they have?
It depends on the program. I mean, there's a lot of different variables that would go into that. It depends. You look at like our Ling Ling Soccer Academy that has 80 participants playing. They only need, I think they use one field, a couple of nights a week, and that is it. Where then you have Shadow Creek Soccer Club that would use all 6 of our existing multi-purpose fields at Hickory Slough Sportsplex every night, every hour, which they can't. We work in some of these other organizations, so it really it depends on the age of the players, the size of their organization, the number of teams that they have, and the types of practices that they're hosting. Sometimes you can put multiple teams on one field at a time.
Okay. And I'll tell you, I had my question written down about having samples of different organizations, how they would be impacted. So that was great. Slide number 24. I'm very curious that the economic impact was such a big jump. You went from 3.2 to 16 million. How did you guys get that? I'm just curious.
And that's what it was tough. And Tracy and I talked a little bit, and without knowing what tournaments we're bringing in, we can't predict that economic impact. So what we did, the roughly 3.3 million was based off of 8 tournaments. We took that number, divided that by 8, multiplied it by 13. We took an average. That's all that is. And I wanted to make sure that was very clear. That number could vary widely depending on the type of tournaments that we bring in. But obviously, we're going to be looking for those tournaments that do have more hotel room night stays and prioritize those over the others.
So when you have these tournaments coming from out of town, are you guys collaborating with CVB to use some of their money to pay for some of these tournaments and to reimburse you guys?
Well, what the CVB does, and I'll let Tracy explain it if I don't cover it all in enough detail, but the CVB works closely with the event organizers into where they may have to pay for security or additional porta potties or different services like some of the temporary field fencing and things like that. The CVB will offset those costs for them.
Okay. Again, I appreciate the thoroughness, and I certainly would tell you I'm the one on this side. I guess I'm on the far left side. So I'm all for pushing this higher. I think it's very reasonable, $10 an hour for a field or $20 for a synthetic field. I think it's very reasonable in today's cost. I know it's going to be a shock. I think you're going to get pushback. I think you just got to hold firm, and you got to have a story, like the mayor said, to sell this. But I think it's very fair. So good luck.
Member Patel, I'll give you a little color on where I started. We didn't play in fields. We played in cow pastures.
The grass that I mentioned.
It wasn't grass. It was cow pasture.
You don't look that old, man.
At the end of the day, we were at Centennial Park, where there are 2 softball fields right now. And I called back then Councilmember Cole and told him there were gaps this wide that my leg could drop into.
We got to get some water out there quick.
We needed some water. Now, right across the way, we were watering the softball fields like crazy, and they were immaculate. And we were out in cow pasture. I can tell you that these fees, I'd be willing to bet you that they're probably the same as when my son started back in 2002. They're not much different. So it's been long overdue, and I appreciate y'all taking this, and taking it serious. It's something long overdue. And when we talk to, because I'm familiar with the soccer side of it, when we talk to Soccer Ted, we need to be able to explain that to him, that it's been artificially low for way too long. And so when it comes into something like that, it's one of those deals that I would probably be in for a phased approach. Y'all call it 100%, I'd call it break even, because I'm looking at it from a business standpoint. But from there, it's just something that, like I said, it's long overdue, and it's something that's reasonable. When I talk about cow pastures, if we go back to slide 3 where it says, I think it was 2011. No, 2000. Yeah, slide 3, 2011. We had 4 fields. I'm assuming you're talking those are softball fields.
Those for softball.
Yeah, because in 2002 that's all we had, and we were playing soccer at Independence Park, and that was a nice field, and it was not much more than a field. So from there, we've built Hickory Slough. We spent millions on it. It's a nice facility, and we still charge cow pasture rates. So it's long overdue on what we need to do. So that's what I've got to say.
Yeah, Carrie, a couple questions up here. Concessions. So, do we as a city run the concession operations, or do we allow the organizations to do that?
I'm so glad you asked that question. And in phase 2, you will have a lot more information related to concessions. There's
I
significant.
like chocolate, by the way. So, yeah.
There's a significant revenue potential with bringing our concession operations in-house. Right now, it is an option for our RSAs to run concessions. Most of them don't. I think Shadow Creek Soccer may have a few bags of chips out there that they open the window and sell a few times, but no one really does effectively operate, except for tournament organizers, the concession stands. And so that's something that will come as a proposed recommendation for additional revenue generation. And that type of revenue will help take us over that 100% cost recovery. Things like that will help take us over those cost recovery marks while still not increasing the fees for our local users. So phase 2 includes several recommendations along that line.
So when we look at one of the last slides that had the entire breakout and economic impact, is that which scenario for Pearland Girls Softball is included in that current to proposed?
That is the increase. Let me see exactly which scenario that one was. That was with PGSA not qualifying for RSA status and they moving to general rental rates.
So 3, so that's scenario 3, I believe, 2 or 3.
It is scenario 3.
Scenario 3. Okay, so on that particular, not this slide, but the slide towards the end that shows the economic impact, we really won't know until we get their feedback on which direction they want to go. Okay, and you know, to that end, I remember selling a bond program in 2007 that created those additional fields out there at Centennial, with and talking to people at Pearland Girls Softball who was struggling for fields, struggling for space, and said, this is your opportunity. You can have all of this. We can move all of that here. So that was the selling point. And so they have moved for practicing, but they keep their games, you know, where they are. And we see the difference in fees. And so, you know, I've got a little one in Pearland Girls Softball, and yeah, my son even says, yeah, well, Pearland needs its own girls softball club. That's what he said. Pearland Girls Softball Association rents those fields from the dad's club. So, I mean, one of the things is we could create our own league. Not saying that we go do that, but we have the fields to go do that. And there's direct competition.
That's where Shadow Creek Ranch started. Was right.
That's
here in the
how they
city.
started. That's how they started. And I know the dad's club and baseball, they run 2 complete leagues off of that facility. They run east and west off of that facility. So instead of 1,000 kids playing baseball, they got 2,000 kids playing baseball, and they truly maximize the limit of those fields. No doubt, they could use those additional fields converted into baseball, and use that and have more space for more kids on there. And again, I'm not after Dad's Club, or I'm not after Pearland Girls Softball. I am after maximizing city taxpayer assets. And they're our assets. They're all of our assets. And so we need to make sure that we're maximizing those assets. So I do have a couple of questions. And Suzanne, thank you for being here. Thank you for participating in this. You mentioned just sports tourism in general. I think you actually mentioned some growth potential that's here. I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about some of the growth potential that we have, and do we have it under our current scenario of fields?
So you do. But let me I've got lots of info, and it's coming in phase 2, and there's so much for this. That's why it's spread out over 2. But we do look at let me find it real quick. We do look at your demographics and your socioeconomics, and that essentially, as I look at those, I look at what we consider your local population, that 10, 15, 30-minute travel time, what that looks like over a 5-year growth period, what your projected growth income or population growth is. And so you're projected to grow, I think it's somewhere between 1.5 and 4% in that time frame of how far people are willing to drive. And again, maximizing the space with what you have, right? That's the most important thing at this point. And so looking at that, looking at what the median household income is in that local, tournaments is another issue altogether. It's outside of that 30-minute range. But truly understanding what you have here, how that fits in, how that growth fits in. Do you, at some point, may you need to consider additional fields? I would tell you that's a yes, right? Yes, everyone probably at some point needs to look at that. Again, I don't want to give anything away for phase 2, but we've done a lot to dive into those.
So does some of that growth potential, obviously we have the phase 2 at the soccer complex.
Yes.
So does that include?
Yeah, so we actually looked at phase 2 and what you're already doing in your CIP and how that will play into that. And so that's.
So on the heels of that, I do want to, Manville has committed themselves to a pretty ambitious sports tourism and sports complex, I think both indoor and outdoor. And as we look to this future, obviously, that's a neighbor to the south. And so I don't know in y'all's analysis and I don't know that, I totally don't understand their timing. Carrie, Tracy, you may know some of their timing of what they're going to do, but how does that fit in as, I guess, a defensive measure? How does that fit in as a threat to what we have going on?
Yeah, so I know we've previously looked at indoor complexes as well. That really is not what we've focused in on this. For this, it's truly how those fields are currently used and how they're going to be used in the future. I do think that is something in the future that you should probably look at, but it does depend, again, on what that is within your region and how that's currently being used.
Well, obviously, part of what Manville's going to be doing is outdoor fields, baseball, soccer, and those types of things as well. So my point is, if we're attracting certain things for tournaments today, how, what, and where do we want to make sure that we're keeping and attracting those same tournaments if and when they build their complexes? So I want to make sure that we're competitive, but also want to make sure that we're, the place to be.
Yeah, and so we've got in the report that you'll see at the end, the competitive position assessment for all of those fields that are 8 or more that could host that local tournament, whether that's a multi-purpose or if it's the 12 to 16 for diamonds. So we've got that in there. There's about 60 of those facilities kind of in that Maryland down and Houston up range. So you'll see that on the map, and we've done the same as well for the multipurpose. It does not include future built, right? So if somebody's got something in the CIP that they're doing that hasn't hit our radar yet, it doesn't include that. We'll defer to Carrie and your team to make sure that that's in there.
Okay. And Tracy, question for you. I guess have you been in the mix of this RSA discussion? And what are your thoughts on our potential for tournaments? Obviously, that's the component that you guys play, potential for tournaments and bringing them in. Do you see us being able to grow tournaments with this model?
Yes, so thank you for the question. I do believe that revisiting this kind of foundational use of the local user groups and the allocation of fields is the first part of what we need to tackle before we can understand the impact on sports tourism. The comforting thing is that with the pace of about the 10 tournaments that we've been hosting over the last few years that grew from the one relationship we have with USFA, we feel like we can meet that commitment that we have on the table now with the Centennial Park restroom upgrade. So if we can just maintain what we've been doing over the last 2 years, we should be able to recoup that obligation for hotel revenue, return on investment. And I think that the way that we have tackled reserving the tournament priority is a huge improvement from what we had previously. And then giving us that flexibility of the 4 additional dates is another added layer that is new to us to access potential revenue for the city.
Good. Yeah, hopefully it would be something that we could grow. What I'm looking for, really, Carrie, ultimately is, yes, let's break even, but secondly, how do we grow it? Not only break even, but how do we grow and then bring in the outside revenue, outside income, and that outside economic impact? And I think, like you said, incentivizing an organization to, you know what, I really don't need that field any longer, let's release it, all of a sudden frees it up in inventory for us to rent it for general purpose, which does bring in the revenue, or at the very least, we can then know, tournament opportunities and those. And I know our tournaments are usually booked years in advance, but once we start booking one, then we know that 10, let's grow that 10 to 14 that we know for sure is going to be here on a year in and year out basis. And we've grown our economic impact that way.
Yeah, and one of the things that we want to take a look at, if we were just to jump, to 20 tournaments right now, that's going to have a huge impact
Absolutely.
on our local users, because then those weekend dates would no longer be available to them. But what, through these policy changes, we are trying to do is open up more opportunity during the week. So when we do start phasing out those weekends for local use, we're maximizing our existing fields to where it reduces that impact on them as much as possible, allowing us to do the tournaments. We will reach a point to where if we want to continue to grow tournaments, then the local users will have to decrease their level of service. And then at that point, once we know that we have maximized our complexes through our policies and our scheduling and that type of thing, then we can come back and have the conversation saying, we're here, now we either add more fields or we have to make some decisions at that point. But we have to go through this process and start. This is a great start to get us to that point, so we know what our potential is with what our existing inventory is.
Sounds good. Mayor Pro Tem, and we'll try to wrap this up here in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, so when you talk about tournaments, I'm assuming y'all are talking predominantly about softball.
Well, right now we've hosted a lot of softball tournaments. We're not able to host soccer tournaments at this time because of the demand on our local soccer programs and having all natural grass fields. Those fields have to rest. And so we're already playing them into the dirt. So we have to be very careful with any additional play on those fields. So right now with our existing inventory, the tournaments that we've been able to host are primarily softball. We've had a tournament called Kicking Ball, not Kickball, Kicking Ball. A few other one-off type things that we've hosted. With the baseball fields that we turfed, that opened up the opportunity to use those baseball diamonds for softball tournaments as well. So as we continue to host more tournaments and in phase 2, there's going to be some recommendations for facility enhancements, things like turfing all of our baseball diamonds. Then that opens up opportunity for different types of softball, baseball, a variety of different sports. Yeah. And then when Hickory Slough phase 2 is complete, then we can flag football, any of the multi-purpose field sports. Then we can start bringing in those tournaments as well.
Right. Well, I mean, I know, what do we have, like 6 fields out there right now at Hickory Slough?
We have 6. We'll be adding an additional 6, and of those, the plan is for 3 of them to be artificial turf.
Right. And as far as that goes, you'll probably find out when you show the split, and I'm talking here again strictly about soccer. When you showed the split, the fields that we had, like I talked about between Centennial and Independence at the time, what we would do back then, which I'm probably sure it's probably what they're doing now, is you'd have a full field, but you'd have two teams on the field at one time. One would get half and the other would get the other half. When you got down to the smaller or younger kids, you could actually get 4 fields off of one larger one. So when you get into the split times, the way they normally would schedule that is your younger kids got the early time slots and your high school kids got the older time slots. To maximize in the soccer arena, or again, softball I'm not familiar with, but in the soccer arena, with only having 6, even going to 12, we still won't have enough fields. So when you get into that type stuff and talking with our soccer community, especially the Shadow Creek group, they're large enough where they will consume pretty much everything we have. I'm going to assume they're still part of BASA, which is Bay Area Youth Soccer Association. If they're not, then they'd be HISA, which is the USEN side of it. And so at any rate, they play games on Saturdays. They don't play games in the weekdays. So in the soccer arena here again, trying to move them to play, that would pretty much be a no-go, because when they schedule that, it's all on Saturdays is when they do it. Sometimes Sundays, but predominantly Saturdays. So just a little FYI for you in that realm.
Yeah, no, that's great. We'll have to make sure that you know, as we move forward into prioritizing some of the tournaments, that will be definitely a factor.
Fair enough.
So, wrap up real quick. I'm going to ask a question, and then that way, Rishi, you can kind of give your 2 cents on it. So, staff has, and I'm hearing pretty much across the board, I think people are ready to start making a move. My question is, are we ready to make this move April the 22nd? Staff's proposal on their proposal is the April 22nd date for council. So, if we're ready for that, I don't want to hold that up. At the same time, I want to make sure that we've had the right dialogue with organizations and whatnot. So, Rishi, you had the mic. I want to go ahead and let you.
Yeah, so Mayor, real quick, Carrie, explain something to me. When you do these rental by the hour, how does the weather play into this? If they can't use the fields due to, you know, whatever reason, are they still going to be able to pay us, or are they going to be?
No, if we have a rain out, then they don't pay for that time.
Okay, and the previous, if you did it by the kid, they just paid you in, right?
And correct.
Okay, so I guess that would have to be a factor in there somewhere percentage-wise, or what do you think the rain out will be? Okay, but yes, Mayor, I would to your answer to your question is I'm okay with April 22nd if the rest of the council is.
I know there's opening gates.
Did you hear that? I mean, obviously, the public is able to come and speak.
So the changes would be part of the non-development fee ordinance, so we would have a first reading and a second reading.
An ordinance. So you'd have first and second reading. So first reading on the 22nd, and then May 6th, or no, May 13th.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm fine with it. That would just be my only concern, is we would get people saying that we didn't get an opportunity for
Or we're going to have, y'all were talking about phase 2. Are you talking about our next council meeting having phase?
Well, that was my next question.
Well, that's
when does phase
yeah.
phase
Well, I
two
was going to say if we're gonna jump in this on April 22nd is phase 2 next meeting, and I'm seeing no.
No, we need some time based on this input now to go back and finalize all of those additional recommendations. So that will come. I don't have a date. I'll get with Susie after this to kind of talk timeline on all of that. But no, that's a little bit down the road.
Phase 2 really helps us with the stair-step approach to get to a break-even point or something like that into the future. So
That's correct.
I like that. Mona? Okay.
So on the April 22nd meeting, what are we looking to talk about?
The ordinance, changing to
Oh, the
their
fee ordinance to
proposed-
here. Okay, fair enough.
Changing to their, okay, yeah.
This layout right here.
And like I said, even this financial impact that's one of the things that I see, you know, potentially changing from this is we don't know exactly which way somebody like Pearland Girls Softball is going to go.
Mhm.
So that's going to have an impact here, but
Yeah, that was,
theirs in the grand scheme of things was much smaller than,
that's about a $10,000 delta if they were to go one way versus the other for revenue to us.
yeah, it just depends. One goes from 8 to 32,000, one goes from 8 to 42,000.
So
Yeah,
what we
so-
need
Yeah,
consensus
so-
from council on would be, it's basically scenario 3, or having, our policy recommendations are moving us to scenario 3.
Because
So-
what they do currently is scenario 3. I mean, the way they use our fields they would qualify under general use.
That's correct.
And that's what we're going to propose to them. That's what we're going to tell them. If they look for alternatives, we're going to have the other alternatives there.
The other alternative would be to move their full program to
Right.
Centennial. The only way with the first 2 scenarios
That's a
would be
$10,000
a council recommendation not to change that policy or to make an exception for PGSA to allow for scenario 1 or 2. So we won't present those as options. We'll let them know that based on the policy changes, it would be scenario 3, unless they do have another option of scenario 4.
Yeah, the difference between scenario 3 and scenario 4 is 10,000. That's the 10,000. Okay.
That's good.
Yeah.
Carrie, real quickly, I don't need a in-depth answer, but how difficult administratively would it be to do a hybrid of having a per player as like a base fee to address the concern that was brought up earlier, and then have that hourly be assessed throughout the year?
For RSAs.
Well, and the concern being the weather?
Yeah.
So in this modeling of this, I'm sure we looked
Weather
at
and my
how much
residence.
we think we can rent the spaces based on traditional
did.
weather patterns.
We did, and one thing to keep in mind is that these estimates are based off of what we're estimating there used to be on a very conservative level. This is what they're reporting to us that they're using in the field. Their use for what they're actually using is going to be higher. So there's going to be
So we don't think that that's a concern, the weather issue.
I think it would address both the weather and also the
Well, the
resident-
weather, the
non-resident
weather's
concern.
built in because they're giving us what
Yeah.
they actually use it.
Correct.
Right. And I think
that's all I've
the
got.
point.
I'm hungry.
This financial impact of the city has actual usage in it. Obviously, they're not using the fields during the rain. And last and final, and we'll close this this workshop. Are we truly able to give maintenance to the fields? Are we at a point where we need to even look at converting additional fields to artificial of some sort?
So let me make sure I understand your question. Is it that with the artificial turf, we'll be reducing the level of maintenance? Is that what you're?
Just the weather events would have less stress on them. I'm not saying that eventually you got to replace those. Eventually you have other maintenance.
That's right. So when you look at long-term maintenance cost, upfront, it costs a little bit more to build the artificial turf fields. The maintenance is kind of a wash. And then you, of course, have about a 10 to 12-year time frame of where you're going to have to be doing some investment and recapitalization of those fields. However, the playability on a synthetic turf field is almost 4 to 1, depending on the type of sport that you're playing. In addition to that, we don't have weather cancellations. This past tournament that we had, our dirt fields, many of those were not playable, but on the turf diamond fields, they moved right along. And so, yes, our return on investment for a turf field is significantly higher, and that's why you'll see in this phase 2 some recommendations for some enhancements of those fields that will allow us to offer different types of sports as well as additional play.
So more to come on that answer.
If we were to turf all 6 fields at Hickory Slough Sportsplex, we wouldn't have any issues out there with meeting demand.
Sounds good. Any final wrap up from staff?
I just appreciate the council's time tonight to work through this, and we've got our direction moving ahead. We'll bring those non-development fees back and start making these changes, and also have those conversations with our current organizations. And I think throughout the conversation, it was apparent that the council's ready and understands that we'll have a lot of input, I'm sure, from those organizations as we move through adopting those changed fees. But it's been a good process. I really appreciate Carrie and her team and putting all this together and laying it out in a way that was, to me, very digestible and something we could dig into and move forward with. So
All right.
appreciate that, and we'll bring it back. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, with that, we will conclude and adjourn this workshop at 6:18.